it's a bit sort of miserable outside, isn't it? But that's okay. We're nice in here. It's really great that we have a wonderful building that we can be safe in, something that many people across the world cannot say as they gather together. So we should never take this for granted, and just how amazing it is. And we are looking at the final week of James this morning. The book of James, we haven't gone through all 12 kind of teachings, proverbs, ideas that James kind of puts together. But hopefully as we've gone through this passage, as we've gone through these texts, there's been enough for us to kind of grab hold of and go, all right, this is how I can understand and this is how I can read James. These are some of the things I should keep in mind and these are some of the things I should apply. The first week, we looked at consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, and that goes on to talk about your faith showing through perseverance will be complete and not lacking in anything. And that's a big James idea, that we battle through trials, we persevere, and that our faith might be complete. A big idea that flows through James, and holding on to that idea of persevering through trials is something that James is big on. And then in the second week, we actually got to hear stories from people in our church who are persevering through trials. A practical way to live out what James says. And then Jordan looked at favoritism. Do not show favoritism, my brothers and sisters, among you, that we should all look to everybody and see them as equal, as made in the image of God. And that call to self-reflection is another key part of James. Look to your own life. Look to the temptations you have to go in this way or that way. Treat these people this way and those people that way. To do this and do that. Don't do that. Fight against it. Be aware of it. Recognize it in your life. A key idea from James. And then last week, Phil spoke on faith and deeds. One of the really simple passages in the Bible, one that's never caused any kind of uproar or any kind of arguments. Everyone's just been like, yeah, faith and deeds, that makes complete sense. And I thought last week, if you weren't here and you can get onto the YouTube, that was one of the best explanations I've ever heard, the clearest explanations of faith and deeds and how they work together. Thank you for that last week, Phil, as we look at what it means to have a faith that just makes deeds happen, right? We have this faith, and it's not about trying to really work it all like we got to make this. It's just, hey, I have this faith, and that causes me to live a way that looks different. And all of those things link into James's key thoughts. He's calling us to something all the time. And this week, hopefully this morning, we'll be able to add another bit of James's wisdom to us, our lives, but also so when we engage with James, we can read it in a good way and help our lives of faith. I went to IMAX on Wednesday. The second time I've been to an IMAX. I'm 2 from 2 with Christopher Nolan films. 2 different IMAXs as well. I've been to one in New Zealand and one in Perth. I went and saw The Odyssey. As many other people in the world have, as many people in this room have. I like history. I like stories that help explain where cultures come from, how they survived, what they did. I like folk songs. I like old Irish folk songs and Scottish folk songs that sing about times, things that happened. I like Canadian folk songs is something that I learnt. I know a lot more about Canadian history because of a band called Great Big Sea. I like to understand the struggles and trials that people go through, and I like mythical stories of monsters, right? I like stories of creatures that are unbelievable. My children and I often discuss how Nessie is real, and I like stories. I love these stories because lots of them are good overcoming evil. Right from the start, right from many different cultures, good overcoming evil is a core part. And I'm a big fan of good overcoming evil. It's why I like wrestling so much. And I enjoy the Disney remake of Hercules, right? It's not at all accurate. And if you are someone who knows the history, you'd probably get annoyed. But it's got the best Disney song. It's got Go the Distance. Oh, a song that brings me to tears. It's the best Disney tune. But... and I try not to let those other things grate me too much. I like Braveheart. I remember watching Braveheart way too young for the first time ever, and my mother will attest to this. I just went white. I was gobsmacked. But I love Braveheart, even though William Wallace isn't called Braveheart. Robert the Bruce is, right? If we know that, we know. And that is a terribly historically inaccurate. It's from a blind guy who wrote it, but that's another story. I like these stories, right? I enjoyed Alexander the movie, even though it's objectively awful as a movie. I enjoyed it because I like these stories. I like these great big things. I like these stories. It's a large part of my journey towards faith. When I was in the later parts of high school, I asked, why do we believe that Roman and Greek gods are myth, but this Jesus guy isn't? And that started me on a questioning journey over the next kind of 18 months that landed me to where I am. So I was excited for the Odyssey, and it didn't disappoint. I had a fantastic time. I loved the Odyssey. It was loud. It was so loud. Like, it just, the bow ring, it was good. Moments of tension, right? The moments of tension that you live for in an epic. Great redemptive themes. I'm a sucker for a redemptive theme, any kind of redemptive theme. The story was there. The Cyclops was amazingly reimagined, and I was, oh, gee, it was good. It was a good film. I had a great time. Throughout the movie, I found myself comparing this epic to other epics, and to my faith and to other stories of the Bible. Seeing Troy fall on a screen in such a violent and vivid way made me feel uncomfortable because the Hebrew Bible speaks of war. It speaks of destruction. It speaks of battles. It speaks of God's people going in and doing that. So there's an uncomfortableness there. I felt the fear and the frustration and the sense of out-there-ness that the characters had towards their gods. And I compared that to the closeness of Jesus in my life. The hope I have in God the Father, the hope I have in Jesus the Son, the hope I have in the Holy Spirit. That they are near, that I don't need to be frustrated by them, that there's not an out-there-ness to them. They are close. I compared the idea of a time of magic, is sort of how this story starts on the screen, in a time of magic and wonder. And how we live today so devoid of mystery and sort of unseenness. And I wrestled with those tensions. But there was one really large part of this movie and this story, so I'm not going to give you any spoilers. You've had a lot of time to read this. It's not new. But this idea of Zeus's law. And it's called that in the film, but it's a Greek tradition that is similar to that of the golden rule, of the royal law, to look after your neighbor, to love your neighbor, to welcome the stranger. And in ancient Greece, this idea is sort of like, hey, if someone knocks on your door, you're to welcome them. You're to feed them, you're to look after them. You don't need to ask questions of them because you would want the same done to you. But a large part of the reason why you should do it is because it could be a god dressed up in disguise. And you should look after the gods. So there's a tension there that is different to us. But this idea of looking after, loving, and taking care of people, I think is at the core of all cultures of all times. And how can you not compare that with the royal law or the golden law that we speak of so much in our faith? God's people were not the only people who thought that looking after people was important, but there was some distinctive differences to why they did it. The book of James is heavy on themes of loving your neighbor, and today we are going to look at how James calls the church to love and action towards our neighbor. So I don't have the slides up, so I'm going to trust that you're going to have your Bibles. You can open them up and you can double check what I'm reading against what you're reading. I'm not making this up. But it's James chapter 4, and it's just 2 verses, 11 and 12. And it might be named something like warning against judging others or something like that. And as you get to that, we can start to read. And it says this: "Do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. Whoever speaks evil against another or judges another speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver and one judge who is able to save and to destroy. So who then are you to judge your neighbor?" The word law pops up a lot there. The word judge pops up a lot. But if I was to summarize that idea, I'd say this is sort of what James is trying to tell us. He's saying you haven't been called to be a good judge. You have been called to be a good neighbor. And I think there's 4 movements in this passage that set up James and what he is talking about. And I think if we understand them clearly, we can understand how to do that and what it means better. First of all, do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters contextualizes this thought to those who are in the community. Who is there? Community of believers. So James starts here, hey, you guys should not speak evil against one another. And then he expands that to judging as well. Whoever speaks evil and judges speaks evil against the law and judges the law. So James kind of now builds this out a bit. If you were to speak evil to someone And if you were to judge someone, you also judge the law. And what does that mean? Well, James isn't talking about the whole Mosaic law here. He's talking about a very specific law, that law that we just mentioned, the royal law. Leviticus 19:18 is where this kind of originates from, love your neighbor. And Jesus grabs hold of that in the golden rule, and he completes his thought of loving God and loving others with that. And James is speaking at a time when the Gospels wouldn't have been written by the authors Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but the teachings would 100% be known, right? The teaching of Jesus didn't just become known when it got written down. James lived it. The disciples lived it. They heard it, and it's undoubtedly going around the churches and the groups of Christians, first century Christians, about his teaching. And that's what kind of creates everything. That's what creates the need to write. That's what creates this idea moving forward. So James would have had this idea of the royal law in his mind, but more closely, it's fair for us to say that in this point in history, James would have had the golden law, the golden rule in mind. Love God, love others. So when he says here law, every time he mentions law, he's not saying the Mosaic law. He's not saying Deuteronomy or Leviticus or Numbers or anything in Exodus. He's saying love God, love others. And he says, if you judge someone, if you speak evil against someone, you actually speak evil of that law and you judge that law. And if you speak evil against that law, if you judge that law, then in the same way you speak evil and judge the person who created that law. So it's actually a very, very heavy call here to not speak evil and to not judge. Then there is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save or destroy. This is pretty straightforward, right, as a theological idea and ideal. God is that authority, not us. Following the train of thought, if you want to judge, you not only judge the law, but you take the seat of God in your judgment. James encourages us. Let's stick to doing stuff. Let's be doers of the word, not judges. Cool Runnings is arguably the best sport movie ever. I wish I saw it at the IMAX. You could throw me a line from Cool Runnings and I could finish it, but that's not for now. It'd fit on the IMAX because it's also not super faithful to the source material, right? But there's this amazing scene. There's heaps of amazing scenes in Cool Runnings, but there's this one scene that really illustrates this idea of someone who really wants to do something, really wants to, I guess in this idea, be the judge, but they're not the one who should be. And it's after they've kind of formed the bobsled team, and there's 4 of them, and Irvin Blitzer, who is the coach of the team, is sort of sitting them in the positions of their bobsled, right? And he goes to Yul Brenner, and he says, you're strong, you're fast, you'll be the second middleman. He goes in, sits down. And then he goes to Junior, and he says, Junior, you're quick, you're brave, you're the first middleman. And then he goes to Sanka Coffee. And Sanka is notoriously the best pushcart driver in all of Jamaica. So he goes to Sanka and he says, Sanka, you're the brakeman. He says, no, I'm the driver. He says, no, you're the brakeman. And that goes on. He says, I'm Sanka Coffee. I'm the best pushcart driver in all of Jamaica. I must drive. Do you see where I'm coming from? And the coach pauses and he says, yeah, I see where you're coming from. And he says, now see where I'm coming from. And he lists off where he's coming from. I'm coming from 2 gold medals in both the 2- and 4-man sled. I'm coming from all these things. I'm coming from years of experience. I'm coming from training. I'm coming from coaching. And he gives his credentials of why he is the coach. But then he goes on to assess the character of the driver. He says the driver is first to show up and last to leave. While all the other guys are out drinking at the bar, the driver is sitting in the hotel studying the turns. The driver is not only responsible for himself, but he is responsible for the whole crew. If anything goes wrong, it's on him. And he says, do you want all that responsibility? And Sanka says, no, I think Doree should have it. He says, so do I. And Sanka becomes a brakeman. How much do we want to be judges? How much do we want roles of influence? Because we're good at one bit, but we don't want the rest. And I think this is a great picture of us as we submit to God. God is a good judge. God sees the whole picture. We are called to be doers of the word, doers of the law. Let's do that and let's let God judge. He is the one who is in the position to do so. And then it finishes with, so who then are you to judge your neighbour? James reasserts his first idea, a warning against judgment, but this time it's open much wider. It starts off as brothers and sisters in the context of the church community, and now he says, who are you to judge your neighbour? So we have this idea, James is speaking to a group of people. Brothers and sisters, you should not judge or speak evil. If you do this, you are not just speaking evil against each other, you are speaking against a core teaching of the law and of Jesus. If you're judging a core teaching of Jesus and you're actually claiming that you are better than God, you know more than God, you know the right answer. And perhaps it should be you that sits on the seat of judgment. Don't do that. Don't judge or speak evil of the teachings of Jesus. Don't judge or speak evil of the law that has been fulfilled through Jesus. Be a doer of the word, be a doer of the teaching. And equally importantly, who are you to judge anyone around you, regardless of their connection to you? Whoever you find yourself in community with. And I think that point's fascinating. I guess if we were to kind of have a modern understanding of this, maybe it sounds something like, hey church, don't speak evil, don't judge. We've been told to love God and love others as ourselves. So if we do want to speak evil, or if we do want to judge, then we cannot be taking a core teaching of Jesus very seriously. We cannot be taking a core teaching of the law and the prophets before him very seriously. In fact, we sort of make a mockery of it. We're not called to make a mockery of the golden rule. We are called to live it out. So let's do that. And let's leave God to judging. There's some tension there. Because the word judge can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. And we can say, but sometimes it's important to judge people, right? Sometimes we do need to judge what they're doing. Sometimes we do need to call out what they're doing. Sometimes we do need to tell them they're wrong. And I want you to hold that tension because it's a valuable tension. But I think we can get a more complete idea. There's a few things we need to wrestle with. First, I think James is being very serious about speaking evil. I think James, alongside Jesus and other New Testament writers, sets the bar very high here about how we should speak to each other. Think about your context and don't use any of the hurtful language or hurtful rhetoric that culture engages in. That's an incredibly high bar of not speaking evil. Just build each other up. That's it. And again, there's a tension there because I like to muck around and I like to say something hurtful and then say, just kidding. And then that makes it okay. That little kind of asterisk, just kidding, makes that hurtful thing I said okay. We call it banter. If you speak evil, it doesn't magically go away because you tried to justify the speaking of evil. James says here, do not speak evil. Don't use hurtful words, don't use phrases or terms that are seen as hurtful in your culture. Because you, the person who says them, doesn't get to decide how they are received. And that's uncomfortable. But it's there. You either speak life into a situation or you don't. You don't sort of. You either speak it or you don't speak it. Think about your words, they matter. James spends most of chapter 3 on this. If you have time this week and you haven't read it, go back a chapter and read chapter 3. James talks about the tongue. From the same mouth comes a blessing and a curse. This should not be so. He says, with the same tongue we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse people made in the likeness of God. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree yield olives or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. You either do one or the other. You either speak life or you don't speak life. Not evil with a caveat on the side of just kidding. And can you imagine how radically different that community would have looked? Can you imagine how the community still looks? Someone rolls in and is just uplifted and encouraged. Life is spoken into them. That is a picture of the kingdom of heaven. Now, secondly, judgment doesn't mean we ignore injustice. It doesn't mean we ignore evil in the world. It doesn't mean we never say anything to anyone. I don't think that's what James is saying here at all. It doesn't mean we let our friends walk a destructive path. In fact, I think judgment is opposite of those things in this context. Judgment is to form not just an opinion of someone, but make it stick. Judgment is to make a final verdict. Judgment is to say, and that's what I think about that. That's what we're called to steer clear of. From our vantage point here on earth, we can never have the complete view of anyone to judge them. We don't know the whole picture. We are not in a position to judge. We do not have the right to sit in the seat of judgment. Instead, we are called to stand amongst those that we are called to love. As a believer of the Trinitarian God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I believe that He is the one worthy of that position. The author and creator of life who has seen all things. He's in a position to judge all things. And thirdly, another thought to take away from here is that James most certainly expands this outside of just your community. And he speaks directly about the neighbours in your lives. Who are you then to judge your neighbour? The you here changes from a communal whoever or kind of a you as a group to you the individual. I believe the text 100% says that, and we see that language change. As a community, you are called to do this, and in your everyday life, individually, you are called to do this. And James also reframes who you are to do this for. The language of brother and sister and one another in verse 11 now expands to you and neighbour in verse 12. A much broader idea of your context, a much broader idea of community. Not just the people you're comfortable with. Again, a change of language in the text. From brother and sister, meaning those who are in, to neighbour, meaning everybody. James starts with the community. This is how the community of believers should live. This is how you should go about life amongst one another. And then he says, now go and also do that with your neighbour. And I wonder what that looks like for us today. What does it look like to love your community? Not speak evil or judge, but what does it also look like to love your neighbour? God has given us a circle of people to love. He hasn't given us a world to judge. There are people in your life, a circle of people who you trust, who you've journeyed with. And if you were to speak in concern, if you were to speak into their life because you have seen something, if you were to pull them aside and say, hey, let's catch up and have a coffee, I want to talk about this, there is a right to do that in the context of friendship, of a community that you've been invited to. And importantly, that person has actually said, yes, I'd like to hear this. You haven't forced your way in with an opinion. You care for them too much to do that. There's nothing judging in that. There's no judgment in speaking to a friend about some things that aren't great, or hearing from a friend some things in your life that could be refined. But that very same conversation with a friend could go completely different with a stranger. It could go in the opposite direction. Judgment might not be your intention, but you don't know their life. And if you don't know their context, and if you make assumptions, you can end up way off the mark. See that difference between how we speak. The good news is, though, there is someone in that person's life, in that stranger's life, who can speak life into them. Just as God has given you a circle of people to love, He has given me a circle of people to love. He's given Phil a circle of people to love. He's given Danella a circle of people to love. He's given Musa a circle of people to love. Look around. We've all got circles of people to love. And the good news is, it means we don't have to try and go into every circle and feel like we can speak life into it, and in doing so judge. We can actually trust that the Holy Spirit is at work in us and in our circles, that we are doing that. We don't need to jump into another circle and try and fix the problem that we see from a distance because we see it as a problem. Because we don't know that maybe that problem is 10 steps further away from the real problem than it was 10 years ago. For us to jump into a circle and to speak into something we have no idea about, we don't know what's going on. Thank God that we have circles and we have people in them who can speak life. And I think James' calling to a wider neighbour idea is twofold for us. Firstly, it's important we are building up our brothers and sisters in Christ. I really like, over the past month or so, Phil has been talking about a big part of church as being a place where you can make friends. It seems like such a crazy thing that we wouldn't say out loud, and it wouldn't be something we expect. This is a place where you can build friendships. If you don't know anyone, you can come in here, you can get to know people, you can get a circle. You can have people in your life. Incredible stuff. But how you build up and encourage that circle might look different to how you build up and encourage those in your circle who might not know Jesus. But we are still called to the same thing. Do not speak evil. Do not judge. For those in our circle that might be a co-worker, a schoolmate, a teammate, the person at the shops, the fried chicken server, whoever it might be, do not judge, do not speak evil. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Your interaction might be all they see of Jesus in that day-to-day living. I was at the gym with Dylan the other day. Dylan's the strong one. We got lots of strong young adults. They're all pretty strong. But we were there and we were chatting about this idea, and he gave this great analogy as we were at the gym. He said, I guess that's sort of like if I was at the gym with you, BT, and I saw that your form was bad, that you were being lazy and you weren't lifting enough weights and you could be doing more, I'd speak into that. So you can lift more. You're a strong guy. He wouldn't have said that. But, you can lift more. Hey, that form is actually going to hurt you in the long run. That's not good for you. Let me help you and let me fix that for you so you can lift heavier, you can get stronger, fitter, and you can also be safe. And he went on to say, if I saw a kid just lifting weights, or I saw someone lifting like Arnie and just kind of like doing everything they could to throw those weights up, I'd weigh it up, but I probably wouldn't go and say anything to them. Because they're doing it differently to how I do it doesn't mean it's completely wrong. It also doesn't mean I need to go and say anything to them. Maybe they're new to the gym. Maybe their friend wasn't with them that day and they're just trying their best to remember what those routines were. And just doing it is a good thing. And we pushed that a little bit further. I said, what would you do if there was a young person on the bench with clearly way too much weight and that would actually hurt them? It would actually harm them physically. What would you do? And I think if he had said, I would go over there and tell them they're doing it wrong, I would have agreed with him. Yep. Because it could hurt them, so we should go over there and tell them it's wrong. But he said one more thing that I think flipped it and changed it and really showed what we're called to in community. He didn't say I'd go tell them that they're doing it wrong. He said I'd go and help them. And I'd explain why they shouldn't have that much weight and maybe drop it down. And I think that's just an incredible way to think about our role as people in this world, in our circles and in our communities. We can go in and just throw ideas. We can go in and say things. But we can also go in and if we're going to speak life, we've got to offer help. Be a good neighbor. I think there's just so much good in that. Do not judge. Do not speak evil. This idea that in your circle you can speak like that. And it's not judgment. We're not having a crack. We're journeying with those people. But I think to go to that gym metaphor, if you do want to speak into someone's life who is outside of your circle, you should offer some assistance as well. You shouldn't just throw a judgment at them. Hey, co-worker, you keep turning up late to work and it's making my life hard. We're not really friends, but you're turning up late and it's making my life hard. How can I help you? What can we do together to fix that? Hey, teammate, you never pass me the ball. Maybe that's a good thing. But, what does it look like to actually offer help as well? You haven't been called to be a good judge. You have been called to be a good neighbor. To those in your circle, in your tight community. You've been called to be a good neighbour to those outside of that as well.